Your thumb is hovering over the keyboard. You've already written the reply 3 times in your head. The explanation, the defense, the one sentence that'll finally make them understand. And then you put the phone down. You don't send. If you've ever done that, you know the strange part comes next. You go quiet. Most people think silence makes a narcissist lose interest. It's the opposite. Instead of leaving you alone, the other person gets louder, stranger, more intense. Silence is the one thing they can't survive. By the end, you'll know why your stillness terrifies them more than your anger ever did, and you'll know why it's so hard to hold. Here's why the mechanism matters more than the behavior. Once you see it, you stop fighting yourself. You stop blaming yourself for reacting. Kafka described this feeling all through his diary. The sensation of existing only when someone in the room was watching. He had no name for it, but a psychoanalyst named Fenichel did. In 1938, Fenichel called it narcissistic supply. His comparison was brutal. He said certain people need admiration the way an infant needs food, not as a luxury, as fuel to stay alive. That's the engine. Now name what it does to everything else. Think about someone you have needed a reaction from. Not just wanted, needed. Right there is where the engine runs. 1. Their identity isn't inside them. It's inside your reaction. A healthy sense of self holds even in an empty room. Theirs doesn't. When you argue, when you cry, when you defend yourself, you're handing them proof that they exist. Your reaction is the mirror they check to make sure they're still there. Your nervous system learned to read the room through their mood first. Yours came second. Think back to the last draft you deleted. What were you trying to protect? That's the surface. The reason it cuts deep is the next part. 2. When you go silent, they don't feel rejected. They feel erased. Heinz Kohut named this wound. He called it narcissistic injury. Most people read it as a bruised ego. It's bigger than that. When the mirror goes dark, there's no self underneath to fall back on. Your silence isn't a choice to them. It's a deletion. It doesn't read as you're ignoring me. It reads as you're deleting me. Nobody fights harder than someone who feels like they're disappearing. It took the field decades more to name the injury that hits when that supply is cut. Think about how your silence lands in the dynamic you're in. Does the other person go quieter or louder? What does that fight actually look like from the outside? 3, they escalate. Every move looks like power. It isn't. Ava Green and Kathy Charles studied exactly this in 2019. The sequence that follows an ego threat was almost identical across the relationships they documented. First, the rage, loud and out of proportion. Then the cold withdrawal, the silent treatment turned back on you. Then the blame rewritten, so somehow this is your fault. Then the smear, the version of the story they tell everyone else. 4 moves. They look like a strategy. They're closer to a panic attack with a script. Has this sequence played out in your situation? Name the step you're watching right now. But if their behavior is panic with a script, why does your own reaction feel so impossible to stop? 4, your nervous system fights the silence harder than they do. You're not weak for that. You're conditioned. When someone runs hot and cold for long enough, your brain builds something called a trauma bond. The intensity becomes the signal that you're safe, even though it's the opposite. When you finally go quiet, your own body panics. Your thumb keeps drifting back toward the keyboard. 2 systems firing at once. Hyperarousal, the body alarm that won't switch off. And hypervigilance, the part still scanning for the next mood change. Both trained by months of treating silence as the moment before something breaks. Did you feel safer the last time you went quiet with someone? Or did the calm feel like a warning? There's even a name for the stillness itself. In 2012, a mental health blogger borrowed a word from geology and called it gray rock, become the least interesting surface in the room. Behavioral psychology has a name for why it works. The extinction principle. Stop feeding a behavior and it starves. The catch is simple. The technique is easy to name and brutal to hold. But there are 2 kinds of stillness, and they look identical from the outside. Sit with one question before you hand any of this to the other person like a diagnosis. Was the reactivity only a response to what they did? Or did some part of you need the intensity too? Not to blame you. Some people don't only survive chaos, they get fluent in it, and walking away from one person fixes less than you'd hope if the pattern shows up everywhere. That's a bigger answer, not a smaller one. And it's why the next distinction matters. 5, performed indifference is a held breath. You're not reacting, but inside you're keeping score, rehearsing the reply, waiting for them to notice you stop. That isn't peace. It's the silent treatment turned back on yourself. Which one is closer to what you're holding right now? Keeping score behind the silence or genuinely not needing the verdict? Real stillness is different. Carl Rogers named the inner version in 1959 in the work that became person-centered therapy. He called it the internal locus of evaluation. The verdict on who you are moves back inside your own chest, where it belonged the whole time. Clinicians call the fuller thing emotional sovereignty. Their opinion stops being the weather your whole day runs on. Here's what most people who try this miss. Sovereignty isn't something you perform. It's what's left when you stop performing. You don't go quiet to win. You go quiet because you finally remembered you're allowed to exist outside their version of you. Their reaction stops being the proof you exist. Next time your thumb hovers over that message, 3 drafts deep, you'll know which voice wants to hit send. Yours was never proof of them. There's a reason your body learned to read intensity as safety, and it didn't start with this person. It started in childhood, in the attachment style you grew up with, long before you had words for it. That breakdown is already up, the video on avoidant, anxious, and secure attachment. Subscribe, and the next decode finds you on its own. We don't just describe people here, we decode them.